Welcome back. It's Tim and Julie Harris, and this is, of course, Real Estate Coaching Radio. We have a fantastic podcast for all of you. It's all about how to take your stale listings and make them sold and how to sell the stagnant listing. Now, these notes are going to be available to you over on our daily newsletter, harrisrealestatedaily.com. So make sure you pop over there. If you've not already subscribed to the newsletter, subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com. All you've got to do is put your email address in a little box and then go over to your main email and just double opt in and confirm you got the subscription. But the notes that Julie's prepared, I didn't work on these, Julie did. It's a lot of detail. And I know we're not going to be able to go through all the detail of all these notes. Wow, Julie, good job. Your point number 10 is excellent. In any event, these notes you're definitely want to get. So go over to harrisrealestatedaily.com. Use these notes, make it part of your own action plan for when you're working with the seller or a listing that won't sell. Maybe use it for educating your team or your brokerage or whatever you have in mind. It is waiting for you. The content is free, harrisrealestatedaily.com. The newsletter is free. And no reason not to subscribe. So Julie, let's jump right in. I know you want to give special shout out to someone from our eXp Realty group and also a premier coaching client that inspired this topic.
Yes, that's right. And again, the topic is from stale to sold, how to sell the stagnant listing. And as you said, this podcast is a special request from many of you, but especially from a listener in Deerfield Beach, Florida. A frequent question that we help agents with in Premier Coaching is how to get that listing sold. So here's the secret that, we often start out with a mindset point at the very top, but the secret is this. There is no magical one marketing plan or idea or campaign or a magic video that's going to get an overpriced or just flat out tough to sell listing sold. So stop looking for the easy button or the miracle, and it's time to sharpen your skills. We're going to talk about how to get your listings moved when they seem stagnant. The object is to indeed be the listing agent at the time it actually sells. We have a rule in Premier.
Right?
It is a joke, but we have a rule in Premier Coaching. You are allowed to list other people's expireds, but you may not have any of your own because you have no excuses with our training, right?
Well, the joke is, the super secret, the big closely guarded secret of all listing agents for generations has been the secret to being a successful listing agent is actually having the listing when it sells. And that joke for about the last 10 years has fallen on deaf ears, but now you guys are appreciating it. And when Julie and I were selling real estate and a lot of our coaching clients over the years, they understood it right away because when Julie and I were selling real estate, the first agent usually didn't get it sold. The second agent didn't get it sold. And you wanted to be the third agent. And when you were the third agent, then you had a better chance of getting it sold. Some markets, it's just like that right now. So as Julie just said, don't be the one with the expired listing and just price it correctly to as close as you can to market when you get a property listed. But something else that we're going to touch on, and I want to really implant this thought in your mind, is make sure when you're taking listings, you set realistic expectations. And Julie, I know your first point is going to cover this as well, so I won't take too much time. But you've got to be setting realistic expectations based on the market that is becoming, not on what you would ideally like for it to be, or not even the market that was for how long it's going to actually take the house to sell. Because if you don't, the seller is going to be listening to everybody in all these different supposed
armchair
experts.
Quarterback types,
exactly,
right?
And they're all going to piss in their ear about, oh, your house has been for sale for 2 weeks and it hasn't sold yet. And so you're going to need to be really, really knowledgeable about what's actually going on with the market. So Julie, let's jump in on point number 1, because that definitely covers that point exhaustively.
That's right. So the first thing that you do, and I think we should define what means stale, right?
Yep.
It depends on your market. Not all markets are working the same like they were during, say, the pandemic, where everybody was fast and furious across the country. So it's going to depend. And I would say take this on a house by house basis. Yep. But I would define, stale, assuming that you have set the expectations. You look at the average days on the market, and if you're getting close to that average, it's starting to get stale. If all of the comps sold in 30 days or less, and you're on day 45, you're definitely stale. If all of your comps for this particular house have sold in 10 days or less, or maybe 1 day or less with competing offers, maybe in that case, you're stale after the second weekend. So adjust accordingly. And there are places in the market right now, especially Texas and Florida, places with higher inventory, where maybe you're not really stale until you're at 60 days because, you're starting to reach that average, but you've got some comps that took longer than that to sell. So I think it depends how you're going to define stale. But let's just say that you've determined that on one or more of your listings that you're sitting on. Again, this is a special request, not just from our agent in Deerfield, Florida, but from many of you.
Well,
First,
Eva, right? Wasn't
Eva.
Evelyn,
I think it's
Julie?
Eve or Eva. Yes.
Yeah,
Evelyn.
she's
So it's Eve. Yes.
Eve, right? So Evelyn, she's the one that sent you this question. Didn't she have for the first time? She had like was more than one listing. Wasn't it like
Yes.
7 or 8 or something?
A few of them are leases, but yes. And she's a great example because she does sell real estate in Florida. And many of our listeners are in Florida. So this is, of course, for Eve, but also for all of you who are getting a little freaked out by the fact that they're not selling overnight like they used to. So the first thing to do, excuse me, point number one is do a new comparative market analysis. You know the house better after several showings, and you've had feedback by this time. Since you've been listed, there's been new closings, new pending sales, and new active listings to compete with. So pretend it's a new listing and you're putting it on the market today. Again, to your point, Tim, in the past was the past. That was the old market. So what's the market looking like today? And consider the following: absorption rate. We talked about that a little bit on either yesterday or the day before. That's how quickly a house like your subject property is, quote, absorbed by the market. So if you have a $500,000 listing in Deerfield, Florida, and typically, you didn't have much inventory, but now you do. Now there's 10 of those that you're competing against, and typically only one sells per month. Maybe there's a 10-month supply. So you're going to have to look at that. The days on the market, is it going up or down? And again, keeping that focused on this actual house with its profile, not your greater market, not the countrywide market, but that neighborhood. The list to sell price ratio, are things still selling for over list? I know I have a coaching client here in Puerto Rico, and she said typically things have been going for almost 20% less than the list price for the past, say, 5 or 8 sales. That's been coming down. It didn't used to be that way. So you want to make sure you freshen this up. And then, of course, all of this is based on the number of homes that you're competing with now. So the case may be that when you listed it, your price looked great because you didn't have that much competition, and all of your comps said that you should have been at 500,000. But now that you've been on the market, say 2 months, maybe there is a bunch of new, maybe there's 2 new build spec homes that are done and there's 3 new resales and they're all a little bit priced under you. Well, that's a different CMA than when you launched the listing. Does that make sense, Tim?
It does. And also there's a lot of little factors that you want to take into consideration. Julie touched on new construction, but there's natural times in the year where the market's going to, I would say, potentially slow down. And when you're taking a listing, you need to set realistic expectations, going back to the original point that Julie and I were making with your seller as far as what they should expect as far as days on the market. So you're going to have working it backwards, right? At the end of the year, you have obviously the holidays. And then prior to that, part of the holidays really is, Thanksgiving. And then before that, you have Halloween. Halloween has become in the last 10 years almost like a 2-week vacation. Markets slow down across the country for Halloween. It didn't used to be like that, but it is now. And then you continue to go back. You have kids going back to school, and depending on your market, you have summer vacations, then you have spring vacation, and you have all these things. So when you're meeting with the seller, you got to sort of schedule out and let them know that there's typically a slowdown during these particular times of year, and don't freak out. So don't freak out if all of a sudden, like if you end up putting a house for sale during one of those, normal traditional seasonal slowdowns, and they don't have a big onslaught of showings, you got to prepare them so they don't freak out, and frankly, so you don't freak out, because that is a great way for you to, frankly, get fired. Because if the seller doesn't perceive that you're confident, or if you didn't prepare them for maybe a little bit lower than what they'd hope for as far as initial showings, they're going to doubt you. They're going to question you in one way or the other. They're going to stop cooperating with you and probably end up firing you. Remember, the secret to being a successful listing agent is having the listing when it sells.
That's absolutely 100% correct. And to the days on the market discussion that rolls into the CMA, I would also say when you're analyzing and you're saying, all right, this listing has been on the market for, 63 days. And I talk to coaching clients about this, you look back at that time, when there's maybe worse times to be on the market. If 2 of those weekends were blizzards and you live in Chicago, don't beat yourself up that you didn't have any showings. I would subtract stuff like that from your actual days on the market. Even like when we were going through the election, nothing was really happening for those 2 or 3 weeks before and another week after. You were talking about Halloween, which is now Candy Fest for 2 weeks or whatever. So should you actually count those days in the market, really scrutinize whether that counts or not. Maybe nobody had showings during those 2 blizzard weekends.
the first 2 months of this year were
Very
slower than
slow.
normal as far as pendings.
Mhm.
And Julie and I have a relatively large group of folks in our group at EXP, 3,300 people or something, and they're in basically every state. And we can actually see the slowdown happening. And you ask yourself why? Well, the election definitely caused people to be distracted mentally and emotionally. And then you had two very significant snow events that happened in most of the country. When it's snowing in Texas, that's definitely going to get people distracted from thinking about
Yeah.
putting their homes for sale. But I've got good news for you. What we're already seeing evidence of is we're seeing an increase in the number of pendings. And obviously, what we feel has happened is the transactions that would have happened primarily in the first quarter of 2025 are going to start happening in the second quarter. So the market's going to come back. And thankfully, we're definitely seeing signs that this is going to be a much better year in terms of overall home sales than certainly the last 24 months, which all of you guys should be very happy about.
Phew, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. And we also know that from mortgage applications that are on the rise
Yep.
as well. So that's all good news. So the point number one was drill down on a new comparative market analysis and don't just do it for yourself, go over it with your seller. Okay, number two, review the seller's motivation. Why are they moving? It's always amazing to me as a coach, especially not always newer, but sometimes I'm surprised how many agents, when I ask them about their listing, like, well, I don't know. I guess they're moving out of state. Why are they moving? It does matter. Are they a have to move seller or just a want to move seller, want to sell or have to sell? What are they doing when it sells? Even if they inherited the property, are they going to reinvest the proceeds from a probate sale? What's the deal? Have they already moved out? Those are your best sellers when the house is already vacant. Remember, their motivation might have changed since you first listed the home, either up or down. Maybe they've talked themselves into turning it into a rental while you weren't looking. Maybe conversely, they closed on their new construction sale that you didn't even know about. It can change as you go through that. And, sometimes spouses talk to each other and they have a different game plan. You need to have those conversations about their motivation. Now, note to self, that could be the issue if they're buying with you and they don't have a good feel for where they're going yet. Oftentimes they'll remain overpriced, for example, because they don't have a plan yet. Why would they give you a better price and or easier showings or prepare the house better if they don't know where they'd move to? Maybe they're kind of subconsciously hanging on to it, right? So the solution is this, and two of my own elite coaching clients have this homework for a couple of their clients this week. Take sellers like this out for a long afternoon or even a full day to see what their options actually are. They need to fall in love with what's next to let go of what's current. You'll remember we used to do this with clients like that.
But Julie, ultimately, this goes back to how well you pre-qualified the seller when you took the listing,
Yes, it
right?
does.
That's the most important question is, do you want to know what the seller's motivation is? Now, if you're dealing with, here's where it gets challenging. If you're dealing with really upper end sellers, they ultimately never have to sell because they can't keep it as a rental. The money can come from another source to buy the next house. So they're paying cash and all these other things. But that's not a majority of you. That's a minority of you that have sellers like that. So a majority of you, the sellers are going to have to sell the homes. And when you're dealing with expired sellers and let's say, for example, have an opportunity to list an expired seller. And let's say, to Julie's point, the original listing with the prior listing agent, they weren't as motivated because they were building a house and it was going to take a year to build. Well, the house was for sale with the first listing agent for 6 months. And they kept it off the market for a month. And now you're listing it, the new construction or the home that they built, new construction, let's say, it's going to be now done in 4 months or 5 months. Well, they don't realize that that's not really, in most markets, going to be enough time to find a buyer, close the transaction, and get them cashed out of their existing home to buy the new one. So you're going to have to know exactly what their timeframes are, exactly what their motivations are. And it is an absolute cardinal sin in real estate not to know what the motivation of all your sellers are. So again, the reason that Julie and I focus so intensely on teaching you guys to be listing agents, put all your best efforts always into being a listing agent, is because when it comes to working with sellers, there are lots of examples that sellers that absolutely positively have to sell that they don't have a choice. I just gave you one, new construction. It could be relocation. It could be legal reasons. It could be all kinds of different things. But on the buyer side of the equation, there's no such thing as a buyer that has to buy because a buyer can always stay put. A buyer can keep renting. A buyer can stay in their old house. You guys get the point. But if you go to a seller, and this is in our scripts that we give you guys with Premier Coaching, and you're pre-qualifying them, you're going to find out exactly what their motivation is, exactly what their time frame is. You're going to find out if they have a plan B that they're working in the back of their head if the house doesn't sell. You want to know all of these questions prior to taking the listing, whether it's essentially a relist because it's an expired, or whether you're taking the listing for the first time. Guys, when it comes to listing real estate, if you want to be successful on the listing side, know the seller's motivation. That is without a doubt the number one most important thing, because you might discover that they have no motivation. Or most likely you're going to discover that their motivation is real, but they don't realize, Mr. Seller, so ideally, how soon do you want this home sold? Well, we want to have the house sold in 4 months. And 4 months, wow, that I appreciate that. So why 4 months? That doesn't really give us a lot of time. Well, I have a new home that's being built, or I have to get relocated. Okay, so you're telling me that you have to essentially be closed on this one and have the money from the sale of this one to buy the next one, and you have to do that within 4 months. And the house is definitely going to be completed, or you're definitely going to be obviously relocated. Yes, that's okay. So we have to have this done in 4 months. Now, agents, doesn't it make sense that once you know that, that's going to play into the conversation about pricing? So and we teach you guys how to do this. It's all part of our Premier Coaching system. When you're going to price a house, Mr. Seller, you have three options. We can price it, way at the top of the market. And your house is a great, terrific house, and I can understand why you'd want to price it there. We could price it at market, and this is based on the CMA, not my CMA. Don't ever say my CMA. This is based on what the market is telling us homes like yours are selling for. Or we can price it at a point where it'll sell for 30 days or less, most likely, and we do have to price a little bit under market. So those are the three options. One, it's going to set on the market, and you're going to have to show them statistically how long it'll take. One, it's going to sit on the market for let's say the average days in the market in this subject property is 120 days, let's say. So this first scenario, it might take, Mr. Seller, 6 to 8 months to sell the property if we price it at the top of the market. Now, if you want to price it at market, then we realistically should be able to sell it for, and the market's telling us it's going to be 120 days. So based on what the market, what buyers are, how long it's taking houses similar to yours to sell, it's going to take around 120 days. Or if we want to get it for sure sold, so you can get the property, so you can move from one house effortlessly to the next one and not have any worries, then we need to price it a little bit under what the buyer's expectations are, so they see it for something of, frankly, it's something that's going to be priced well. They're not going to want to negotiate. They're going to want to buy the house and maybe forgo seeing some of the other ones because they see that you priced it more competitively. So, Mr. Seller, given your time frame, which do you think makes the most sense for you? That's the power of knowing their motivation. And that's the power also of knowing how to basically put a correct price on the property that's commensurate with, that's in alignment with what the seller's motivation is, versus what most agents do. They don't know the seller's motivation, and they end up overpricing it and it ends up expiring. And that's the reason that we said oftentimes it's better to be the second listing agent. Julie?
Yes, very well done. You killed that script without just off the top of your head, because you used to deliver that script all the time, and it
Well, and
works.
coaching clients too, right?
And
So you
coaching
role
clients,
play it
yes.
exactly.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I would say one more thing with that script, because this again gets back to setting expectations with your seller. If they need, like in your example, they want to be sold and closed within 4 months, say relocating or building a house or whatever. Okay. But you find out based on your CMA that the average days on the market for a house like that's taking 6 months, and you talk about that with them, they're going to be more likely to price it in such a way that they're trying to beat the odds of sitting on the market longer than their personal time frame of their motivation. Now, you might find out the opposite of that, the dreaded, well, if it sells, it sells. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Is that really true? You can drill down on that.
But that goes back, but that goes back to the original motivation. And if you run into a seller that basically says, well, I'm just going to rent it. If I can't,
that's our next point, by the way.
Right. I know. I'm just going to rent it if I can't sell it for my next price. Or you might occasionally get one that is not that interested in selling it, but you guys will have to develop spidey senses over time. And what you'll often discover is some of the people that are the most motivated are the ones that are least likely to want to share with you what their true motivation is. And almost always when they're like that, it's because they got financial issues or there's a personal issue that they're just not comfortable telling you. But you're going to have to learn to ask questions in such a way that they're going to want to give you. So, Mr. Seller, if this property doesn't sell within 120 days, what's your plan B? Well, I don't know. We'll just see when we get there, blah, blah, blah. Let's just say they're trying to be evasive like that. Well, Mr. Seller, just so I'm clear, if I pop by or if I bring by a buyer that wants to purchase the house and they want to close in the next 60 to 90 days, is that going to present a problem for you? No, that'll be great. A little about percent. Okay, so perfect. So if I were to bring a buyer by that wanted to close in the next 60 to 90 days, everything, makes sense. It's the exact buyer you've been looking for. Where are you going to go next? Right? So when we're teaching you guys how to script, when we're teaching you our scripts, we're not just saying, say this is the only, solution. This is the only way of, only script to get to the solution. We're going to teach you how to ebb and flow because not every seller is going to react the same way. And that's really important that you understand that. And some of you are going to say, well, Tim and Julie, your scripts are too direct. I agree. In some markets, our scripts are too direct. So you're going to want to remember when you're working on scripts, it's a 3-step process. First of all, you do want to memorize it. Then you want to internalize it. And then you want to personalize it. So when we say memorize it, we literally want you to memorize the words and say the words exactly as they're saying on the script in the order in which they're saying. Don't edit anything off or add anything. Just do it exactly the way we've written it because it's been proven to work in every market. And then we want you to internalize it. Internalizing it happens after you've personalized it because after you've memorized it. Because when you internalize it, that means it's starting to feel like your words. And then we want you to personalize it. That's when we want you to add your flair. That's when we want you to, add your local colloquialisms and things of that nature.
But that's when you really own it without getting away from the reason you memorize it is because scripts are questions. Okay. And they're there for a reason because there's a pattern to it that ends up with either closing on an appointment or deciding that they're, not right for you. Maybe you refer it, maybe this is the wrong time for them, whatever. But don't try to personalize before you memorize because you'll be missing the point of why the scripts work.
Personally, Julie, I don't think I don't think you should ever turn down an opportunity to list a property, period, full stop, ever. If you run into a seller has unrealistic expectations and they're not motivated, I still think you should list the property. But just tell them. So Mr. Seller, let's just say they don't care if it sells, it doesn't matter. Because here's what happens oftentimes when you get somebody that is initially like that is their motivation changes over time. They find another use for the money, right? They decide that they don't want to be landlords. So anytime you get a listing opportunity in a market like this, when there's a lack of inventory, list every damn thing because you never really know what other opportunities that's going to create. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with the caveat that you have to have a plan and you have to have really good communication because you got to know if they're changing and find their motivation,
Well, always be honest with the seller. So Mr. Seller, I agree that let's say it's worth 500,000. I mean, there's so many different things that Julie and I are wanting to share with you, but we just don't have the time on the podcast. But you don't ever want to say, for example, lower the price. You don't ever want to say my CMA. You don't ever want to put yourself in a position when you're talking to sellers where you are causing them to emotionally feel like you're in opposition of what their goal is. All sellers, by definition, are wanting to be overpriced. It's their egos. They think their house is worth more than whatever the comps will say. But if you say my CMA, then all of a sudden you're in an adversarial position subconsciously to them and their egos. That then now all of a sudden you're probably not even going to take the listing. Mm-hmm. So you always want to say things like, for example, the buyer's expectations. I mean, it's kind of a nicer way of saying, the buyer, essentially it's overpriced. We need to price the house in alignment, Mr. Seller, or we should position the house on the market so that it's in alignment with the buyer's expectations. Isn't that a lot nicer than saying lower the price?
Yeah, or my price versus your price.
Right. And you'll find that you'll be able to not just get price changes easily when the market changes, but you'll also be able to get sellers to want to list with you in the first place if they feel like I want you to literally be, I'm sitting at a table. I want you to be emotionally and mentally thinking the seller is sitting next to me, not in opposition to me. Because if they're sitting in opposition to you, then you're not going to take the listing. And that's the reason you need to give them 3 choices when they're positioning the house. See, I didn't even say pricing, but when they're positioning the house in the market, you need to give them 3 choices as far as where they want to price it and let them choose, but let them understand the ramifications of going, large, medium, and small as far as where the price is going to be. And then they still will choose, but you're going to remind them what their motivation is, and you're going to remind them what the ramifications of the decision they make with regards to, positioning, AKA pricing. So if they want to price it at the top of the market and they only have 90 days to sell the home and the market already is telling the seller that it takes 120 days to sell the home, Well, pricing the house at the top of the market when they need the house sold a lot faster is going to be a conversation you're going to need to have with them so they clearly understand the ramifications of their decisions, right? That's your job. That's what you get paid to do is you need to understand the seller's ego, their emotional state, their financial situation, their motivation, and then you need to help them through your questions and your professionalism come to the conclusion of, help them to arrive at the set of decisions that's going to be in alignment with what their goals truly are. And if you're not going to keep the listing. You probably won't even be a listing agent to begin with. Guys,
Yeah.
hopefully this is resonating with you.
This is pretty advanced too, because when you were talking through the scripting, I'm also reminded of the power of saying you can do A, B, or C, which is best for you, because that keeps you on that same side of the table. It keeps you away from being adversarial because they're choosing. We can go low, medium, or we can do one of these three things, which is best for you based on what's important to you. That keeps you out of that my price versus your price, my plan versus your plan. It gives them control, and sellers really need to have control. A lot of the conflict that happens between agents and sellers is when the agent feels like they're being told what to do, they're out of control. And all of that kind of is maybe true because the market's ultimately telling them what's going to happen or not happen. But nobody likes to be told what to do. That's when you can get that adversarial vibe going. And that's how agents walk away from a listing appointment without the signature.
Julie, I had similar messaging on Instagram. If you guys want to message us, just go to timandjulieharris.com. And these are from podcast listeners and people in our EXP family. And they're freaking out about the fact that in their markets, the showing activity has slowed down. And they're starting to get these sellers that are, what have you done for me lately type conversations. And those ones are scary, right? You take a listing and all of a sudden that you're not getting activity and you're saying, excuse me. And the seller's saying, well, what the heck is going on? It's that Janet Jackson song. You guys remember that? What have you done for me lately?
Yeah.
That was our joke, but yes. And so we created the 120-day communication plan where it tells you exactly what you should be doing with that seller, literally day to day, week to week, while you have the property listed. And the plan is written in such a way that it's anticipating what the seller's next point of angst is going to be. That's going to be inevitably pointed at you. Right. So you're going to want to anticipate what their pain points are going to be into the future so you can head those off. And then you'll keep the listing. Remember, the secret to being a successful listing agent is having the listing when it sells. So the 120-day communication plan, a lot of the other scripts and things we talked about, where all the other scripts are available at Premier Coaching. And if you're not a Premier Coaching member yet, the good news is that you can join now for free. The good news is that you can join now for free and have instant access to all the first level. And have obviously you'll be attending your daily semi-private coaching call with the Harris certified coach. Oh, and there is even more good news. Depending on how you choose to join, you'll also have access to the ethical real estate professional designation. So make sure you go to premiercoaching.com. Oh, you thought because I said there's good news 3 times that I was going to say there's bad news. There is no bad news. The only bad news is if you don't join, you take a listing tomorrow, it doesn't sell right away, you end up getting fired, right? Remember, the first point we made before Julie got to her first official point was you've got to be setting realistic expectations for the seller. Julie, let's give him an extra script. Is that okay?
Sure. Go for it.
So, Mr. Seller, and you have to adjust this accordingly. This, by the way, has been around for like 1,000 years probably, but it's so true. Mr. Seller, in our market, if you don't have a written verified offer within the first 2 weeks or 10 showings, generally speaking, that's the market telling us, so the buyer's telling us that it's around 10%. It needs to be repositioned around 10%, right? So, Mr. Seller, in our market, after 2 weeks or 10 showings, whichever comes first, if you don't have a written verified offer on the property, it's the market telling us that we need to reposition the house on the market, usually by 10%. And just say that when you take the listing. Now adjust accordingly. If you have a market where it's taking a lot longer to get an offer, Mr. Seller, it's no longer 2 weeks or 10 showings. Now maybe it's 4 weeks or 10 showings, or maybe it's an upper end property where there's a lot of, there's not a lot of activity. And so you're going to say, well, after, 30 days or 3 showings, you guys get what we're getting at here. So you need to let the seller know what to expect. So Mr. Seller, after 2 weeks or 10 showings, if we don't have a written verified offer on your property, we're going to have the conversation about repositioning the house in the market so that it correctly reflects the buyer's expectations. So today is this date. So please write in your calendar that on this day, we're going to be having that conversation if we don't have an offer, if we haven't actually had 10 showings. Guys, get it? Now I'm going to give you another one too. And this is all for those of you who are freaking out because you haven't sold your listings yet. the sellers are going to ask you, Bob, what are you doing to get my property sold? And like, I hated getting that question. We sold real estate. You know, Bob, what are you going to do? What are you actually doing? I see other agents that are bringing buyers through, but you haven't even brought any buyers through. Mr. Seller, listen, I really appreciate you asking me that question. And the fact is that, Mr. Seller, I might not always be the agent that's showing the property, but I'm the reason it's getting shown. Can I tell you why? Right?
That's the best script ever.
You know who wrote that, Julie?
I don't remember, but we used
We,
it so many times.
yeah, we didn't. Diana Kokoska did.
Yeah, yeah. She has
She
some
did.
really great scripts.
She
And,
was this. Yep,
she used them
Diana
as
was
well.
this. She was the script czar. But yeah, so Mr. Seller, I really appreciate you asking me that question because remember the seller's coming at you somewhat adversarially, so you want to say that you appreciate their adversarial question. So Mr. Seller, I'm so glad you asked that question. So Mr. Seller, I might not always be the agent that's showing the property, but I am the reason it's getting shown me. I tell you why. And then you need to go back to your marketing plan that's as part of your pre-listing pack, which we give you in Premier Coaching. Then you need to remind them all the things that you're doing every single day to get the property sold. In the seller pre-listing package, there's the list of the things that you do to get the property sold. You need to remind them that those are the things that you do every day. So Mr. Seller, every single day, and you're going to show them your schedule, what you do every day. Mr. Seller, if you'll recall, every single day from this time to this time, I'm actually proactively going into the marketplace and looking for buyers that might be a good fit for your house. Now, those buyers might not be those buyers in your price range, Mr. Seller. They're working, obviously adjust accordingly. They're working with other agents, and the agents they're working with are the ones that have their properties listed. So these are great buyers whose houses are for sale, and the agents that are representing them on the listing side are also helping them to look for a property. So I'm communicating with all the agents that have properties for sale where those buyers might be good fit for your property. I'm obviously looking for a relocation buyer, all the things. So my job, what you hire me to do is, yes, correct, sell the property, but part of selling the property is finding the buyer who wants to buy the property, even if that buyer's not working directly with me, and go and lean back into your pre-listing pack and then move away, and they'll be satisfied with that. They didn't want to ask you the adversarial question to begin with. And then just follow the system and the plan that we create in Premier Coaching. You'll avoid that, you'll avoid that right away. And you're going to run into these types of same situations when you're dealing with expired sellers. My agent never sold my property. I never heard from my agent once I listed the property. Mr. Seller, I'm sorry you had that experience, but that's the reason that we have the communications guarantee. And you guys, if you're not in Premier Coaching, you don't know what that is, but what it does is effectively eliminates the seller's biggest gripe that they have, and buyers for that matter, they have with agents, is the lack of communication. You're going to give them a communications guarantee, which guarantees how you're going to communicate with them while you're working with them. And you're going to put it in writing. And that's, again, something we teach you guys how to do in Premier Coaching. All right, Julie, let's get to the next point.
Yes. In fact, that communications guarantee is also part of the buyer packet. So
yep, that's right.
All good. Yes. Okay. Point number 3. I don't think we're going to get to all of our points, but they can get that from the newsletter. Okay. Point number 3. This is fairly straightforward. And again, this should be happening in the pre-qualification, but you can also circle back to the seller and ask them the question once you've had the listing for a while. Is keeping the home an option for the seller? You touched on this a little bit. Might they lease it? What happens if they tell you that that's the backup plan? First of all, always say, yes, you can and should handle the lease for them. You can also, in many cases, advertise it for lease and for sale simultaneously, and then decide what to do based on what happens first. The seller can always turn down either a price they don't like to sell or a lease situation they don't like. But here's the secret. Once you discuss the reality of being landlords, this is where agents go wrong. They just say, oh, well, okay, I'll advertise it as a lease. You have to have that discussion too. Talk to the seller about the reality of what it might be leased for and their net income, potentially. They might change their mind about being a landlord, especially sellers that are not already investors that are used to being a landlord.
Let me jump in here.
If you haven't already, you should know how to research what it would lease for. Go ahead.
All right. So, but all those points made, calling for lease by owners that's a great source of listing leads.
Oh yeah.
Because a lot of them are going to be reluctant landlords. In other words, the property didn't sell. Maybe it was a for sale by owner. Maybe it was an expired. The property didn't sell, so they're what we call reluctant landlords. But this all goes back to the original point we made about pre-qualifying. You want to, so Mr. Seller, if this house doesn't sell, do you have a plan B? If they say they want to lease, they're thinking about leasing the property, Mr. Seller, I appreciate that. And this might make for a great rental. Do you have any other rental properties? Have you leased property before? And they get into their heads to find out what they're actually thinking. And Julie, she wasn't trying to make the seller wrong, and that's the other, rookie mistake. If a seller says, "Well, I'll just lease the properties," don't try to tell them about how much it sucks to lease properties and how the toilets will get clogged and the seller or the buyer will trash the property. Don't doom and gloom them. Just find out how much they thought about it, because oftentimes you're going to realize the seller hasn't thought about it at all, and they don't really want to lease the property. So, but if you do still have somebody that's dug in their heels, let's get to the next point, Julie. Actually, you've already mentioned it. If you have someone that's dug in their heels and say, "Well, I'll just lease the property," you can then say, "Okay, well, let's do this. Let's go ahead and put it for sale. And then I'll also put in the comments that the house is available for lease as well. And whichever way it goes, Mr. Seller, is the way that it's meant to sell or meant to lease. So if it sells if it sells great and all the numbers make sense, then we sold the property. But if you end up getting a viable lease candidate and all the numbers make sense, then that's what we'll do. We'll just lease the property. What you're doing at the end is you're keeping that relationship, because when the lease is up, if that's the way it ends up going, then you'll end up having that listing again. You can get it sold. But to Julie's point, make sure you go through all the numbers and the seller realizes, that you're, in most cases, when you factor in all the maintenance and the upkeep, the property insurance, all the things, that is almost never going to cover the lease payment is never going to cover, almost never going to cover the actual cost of carrying the house. And then we give you a lot of scripts for that too. Mr. Seller, do you really want to be subsidizing this tenant's lifestyle by living in your property?
Yeah, especially if they have a mortgage payment to cover, and property taxes are going up and all of that. Okay. So point number 4, set up a reality tour. That's our nickname for it. Do your research first to know what you are going to show and how it impacts the subject property. So what you're doing on a reality tour is looking at the actual competition. You can do that on your own and report back to the seller with a nice meeting with them, ideally in person, or you might even take your seller out with you to see in person what they're up against. You can also look at pendings. What are the houses that did sell and at what price? Don't overcoach the seller when you do this. Show the properties and ask what their thoughts were. There was a show, I don't know if you remember this, there was an HGTV show where it was an agent that was going to expired listings and counseling with that seller and then going out and showing them, hey, here are the 4 houses we're competing against. What are your thoughts? And it was very interesting, actually. I'm sure it was probably half staged, but it was interesting because you'd see the seller kind of process things in their mind and they'd go, oh, well, that new kitchen really is nicer than my kitchen. I can see why that's pending and why my house isn't for the same price, that kind of thing. You can do that also over a Zoom. You can, share that information. I think it's really great in person if you can. And especially if you're competing at the same price with new construction, because it cleans the clock of resale almost every time.
And don't have the seller convince themselves and try to convince you that just because the new construction's more money or not in the, perfect location or whatever it is, don't let the seller, breathe or believe their own hopium about pricing. They got to go out and realize that the builders are buying down interest rates. The payments are going to be less. The house is new. The carrying cost of the house is new. Obviously, infill homes closer to the city centers and all the amenities are going to be more desirable. But what we're seeing across the country is a lot of people are deciding to go new construction, even if it means they have to drive or to a half hour, 45 minutes to some of the amenities that the city offers. Austin, I'm talking about you, Columbus, Ohio, all these big cities. People are more than willing to drive to frankly have a newer house that's not going to require as much work, if any work at all. So these are all important things you're going to have to know when you're dealing with the seller. And these all go back to the original, knowing the seller's original motivation. I'm going to give you guys a bonus point, and Julia, then let's level off and they can have the extra 5 points when they are subscribing to the newsletter. You are going to come across the occasional seller that's going to be dug in about their price and they're motivated. But they're, for whatever reason, frankly, it's ego, they're going to be thinking their price of their house is worth more than what the market's willing to bear. You're going to see this especially where they put in a pool in a property or they've done improvements that are maybe nicer than what the neighborhood's willing to pay for. So they're going to lose money on the money that they put into the house. You need to suggest to them, remember, your goal is not to be adversarial with them about price. It's not your CMA. It's the da-da-da-da, right? Mr. Seller, listen, I definitely appreciate the fact that you have made this house really fantastic. And the backyard and the pool you put in is extraordinary. And I realize we have no comps. There's no other properties that we've seen sell that are anywhere close to the majesty that you've built in the backyard. But here's the challenge we've got. I believe your house is worth what you're thinking. I see the reason why you're thinking the house is worth where it is, because now that I've seen the property, I totally get it. It is really something like 10 steps above what any of the sold comps will represent. Make the seller feel good. That's what I'm doing here. But let's do this. The buyer and the buyer's agents are going to be walking into the house, and they're going to be knowing what the comps are. They're not going to know how to value the extra work and money you put into the property. So let's do this. Let's have the property appraised by a third party. You know what? You can even choose the appraiser. It doesn't matter. I will cover the cost of the appraisal, and I'll reimburse you for the cost of the appraisal at closing. Because here's what we'll do. We'll have the property appraised. We'll leave the appraisal on the kitchen counter for the buyer's agents and the buyers to actually see what the appraised price is. And hopefully the appraisal is in alignment with what you and I think the property is worth. And then the sellers or the buyers will feel comfortable in paying that price. And then again, it'll create a lot less tension when we're getting the property sold. Okay, you guys see what I'm doing there? So what you're going to do is you're going to remove you from the hot stove of having to basically be the bearer of bad news. The challenge with being the one that has to be the bearer of bad news is all it's going to take is another agent to come in and blow sunshine up the sellers, you know what, and say, oh, of course, it's a $500,000 neighborhood, and the seller thinks the house is worth $850, and all that agent's gonna have to do is say, heck yeah, it's worth $850, no problem. Whereas you've gone in there and you've done all the analytical research, you've done the CMA, you want to now hash it out with the seller, you've got all your fancy scripts because you want to, convince the seller to price it according to the market. The other agent comes in 5 minutes, agrees to seller price. The other agent gets the listing. Now you're saying, well, that other agent will never sell it because they overpriced it. But what you don't know is that other agent knows that the seller has to have that house sold in 90 days. So the seller's motivation is going to go through the roof, and they're going to be ending up getting price adjustments, and they're going to get the price down to the point where the house is going to sell. You guys following me on this? So when you're in that situation, you cannot make the seller wrong, especially if they're very motivated. That's just giving the listing away. And if you have somebody that's really digging their heels in about price, use the idea I just gave you about the appraisal, because I'm going to tell you what happens. They're never going to agree to it. And the more expensive and fussy and unique the property, the less likely they're going to be to agree to the appraisal, because it works both ways. If they have the appraisal done, even if it's not costing them anything, even if they chose the appraiser and the appraisal comes in lower than their number, then they're going to have to mentally and emotionally accept the lower number. They're going to know that you guys, you kind of get what I'm getting at here. So what they then will do is you say, listen, let's just have the house appraised, and we'll just price it wherever the appraisal price is. They're going to say, well, and then they're going to take a step back, and then they're going to reconsider where to position the house in the market so that it does get the property sold. You guys follow me on this logic? So that's your plan, like Z, if you're dealing with a very fussy, usually upper end seller that has a house that probably is weird. It's contemporary, it's modern, it's over improved, or frankly, it needs a lot of work. It's, it needs updated, those types of things. Use the appraisal card, offer to sell, offer to pay for it, offer to reimburse them at closing. So guys, we have an additional 5 points. The next point is discuss taking it off the market and trying it again later. The next point is ask if they can, the plan to relist.
This is if they're fixing to fire you. Remember when we used to ask, what is your plan? Are you thinking about another agent? What are they going to ask you to do? Lower the price. First thing they're going to go to.
Right. So then we have the next point, which is all different scripts and all these things. Guys, listen, there's 10 points total for today's outline. We've gotten through point 5. You want to go and listen to you want to download the notes. The notes are available right now at harrisrealestatedaily.com. That's where the next 5 points are going to be waiting for you. And get the notes and definitely use these. Use this as your checklist. Use this as your plan if you're stuck in a situation where your listings aren't selling. Guys, the markets like this are scary if you lack knowledge and experience. Markets like this are exciting if you see how, frankly, those of us who are willing to drill down, willing to learn new scripts and skills, and really see how incredible a changing market is for opportunity. Because if you're in a market, Julie and I did this twice when we sold real estate, and I think it's probably one of the reasons so many agents choose us as their coaching clients or as their coaches, is we originally, our first year in the business, we sold 100 homes in what was really a first-time home buyer market. Now, we were getting listings that would have otherwise gone to the agents that had been in that market for 30 years, right? So we were with no experience, looking like we were 12, going into the marketplace, competing with really great, very experienced agents, and we were winning consistently. right? So a lot of agents are obviously interested in learning how to do that. That's what we teach you in Premier Coaching. But then we did it again. We built a very steady market, a business of 100 to 200 homes per year. And then we had the epiphany, we can actually take the skill set and the approach to working that we have, and why don't we just double, triple, quadruple our price range, our price point, and go out to a different market? And that's what we did. And we looked for a market that was an adjustment phase, which was going to an expired type market where the days in the market was extending, because we knew we could beat the established agents. Because when a seller is thinking about putting their house for sale, your biggest number one competitor, or who they're going to go to mostly, is the agent that they already know, the agent that they've used in the past. And then the next agent, if they don't know somebody from previous experience, then they're going to list with a referral, probably from a trusted friend or advisor. And then maybe like a handful of them are going to list from advertising, marketing, and branding, and all the rest of it. So when the listing expires, your biggest chunk of competitors, the ones that they would have already listed with, or a referral from a trusted friend or advisor, they've already lost. They didn't sell the house. They already failed. So that's the reason that if you see a market where there's a lot of expired or increasing expireds, it is an unbelievable opportunity for you to go after that market. And if you apply what we teach you in Premier Coaching, you're going to have that je ne sais quoi. You're going to have a pre-listing pack. You're going to have communications plans. You're going to have all the things that we teach you that will set yourself apart. Guys, the way you win in this market, in any business, is not by more marketing and branding and trying to make yourself unique into an influencer. It's meeting the seller where it's at. It's understanding their situation, using the content and material that we've used for, in our coaching program for decades, that's been proven to work in every market condition, every price range. You can definitely do this. We've already done all the heavy lifting for you. All you've got to do is apply yourself into Premier Coaching, and you're going to start having success. And again, if you're in a market that's starting to, you're starting to see days in the market extend and more expireds, be incredibly excited about this, because the bottom line is the greatest fortunes of men and women have always been made during the greatest times of change. And we're in one of those change markets now. So be super excited about it. So on behalf of Julie and myself, thank you for listening today. If you want the additional 5 points, go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.